Welcome, everybody. I'm going to mute so that we can hear each other. For those who don't know, I'm Rabbi Ellen Wollensfields. I'm the Executive Director of Women's League for Conservative Judaism. This is a huge evening for us to truly celebrate a project that started now 19 months ago. We started 18 months ago, and just the way our Talmud has many stories, there's a whole story to how this all started, and I'm sure I might not get it all right, so I apologize for that. But one of the ways that our study started was that in 2017, I wasn't part of Women's League yet. I was a member, but not on your staff. And there was, at our convention in 2017, there was a Siyyum for Eicha. Then I came on. Ellen Bresnick during 2017 was and Ellen, you're okay to interrupt me at any point if I don't get it, okay? And then Ellen at that time was the head of our education. She was chair of the education, I don't know the exact title. Then when I came on, she was personnel, so we would speak very often. And also Barbara Ezring was head of our education for the last administration under Margie. And we were talking, Ellen and I, and said, we need a program, we need to study, there are things that we need to bring in, there's so many incredible educators out there we want to bring to teach our women. So Ellen was like, I see you. Then come in, and Barbara was the education. Then come in the book, If All the Seas Were Ink, with Ilana Kershan, who wrote a book about, and she was one of our Women's League reads, she wrote a book, who happens to be Chancellor Schorsch's niece. Isn't that great to say that? Chancellor Schorsch, Shuli Schwartz, her niece, who wrote a whole book about her 7.5-year study of Daf Yomi, where you study a page of Talmud every day. So between Ellen saying that and saying we need to study something, and the Daf Yomi, I said, why don't we start, and at that point it was 18 months till our convention in Schaumburg, why don't we have an 18-month study every other month? There are 9 chapters, we'll have some introductory, probably was even before that because we had some introduction classes. Let's all study Mishnah Brachot together. We'll get some incredible educators from around the world, and literally we did do it around the world. Prepare the sheets beforehand from Sfaria, study it together, and it will be taped and recorded in prosperity, that everyone can study it. Even if you've missed it, you could still study it. We were going to have the Siyyum at convention in Schaumburg, and we wanted it to be a special event just for our Siyyum tonight, so we have it now. You'll see that our teachers that have educated us over the last 9 chapters plus introduction have contributed this evening. I got to see that one is also with us. I see that Rabbi Gail Labovitz is here, and Rabbi Chaya Rowan Baker and Rabbi Amy Levin have very good excuses. They live in Israel. Rabbi Gisa Edinburgh, if the world was what it used to be, she probably would have been at Ramah, Wisconsin this summer, and she may have been able to join us, but she's in Germany. That's where she lives. And many of our other educators may be coming on as well, but we'll all study it. So tonight we're going to be studying chapter 9 with Rabbi Cheryl Peretz, and I'm going to let her speak and just tell me when to put the slides up, and sit back, relax, enjoy, because it's going to be a wonderful evening studying.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Rabbi Wollensfields. It's good to see you all and to be together. I want to also acknowledge my colleague, Rabbi Labovitz. It's great to have you. And yes, today is also the last day of Masechet Shabbat.
That was coming up later.
Yomi cycle, so I think there's a couple people who are doing Daf Yomi, so we get to have a double reason to have a Siyyum. And I also want to acknowledge before we begin, there's so many people on, you may not see the name, but Rabbi Aviva Funke is with us. And after we do the learning, I've invited her to participate in our Siyyum with contributing her beautiful artistry of music. And so thank you, Aviva, for being with us also. For those of you who may not know, Aviva is a recent graduate of the Ziegler School and spent 2 years as a day school rabbi and is now moved back near her home of Scottsdale to head up a community school. And equally as important as all that she's a talented musician and spiritual director, and also has 2 really cute kids. So Aviva, thanks for being with us. I know you're not yet on video, but I'm happy that you're, oh, you are now. Hi, thanks for coming. Thanks for accepting my invitation. So what I want us to do though first is to spend a little bit of time looking at chapter 9 so that we actually have a reason to do a Siyyum. And we're going to attempt to do all 5 of the Mishnayot from chapter 9 in about a half an hour, because then we want to have time for an actual Siyyum, which we'll talk about more when we get there as well. So please feel free to write in the chat, or just wait. If you do have something you want to say or a question, you can unmute yourself, just not all at once. But this doesn't have to be a lecture. It can be interactive. But as you know from the journey that you've been on over these months, the Mishnah of Brachot goes from times of prayer to content of prayer to types of blessings to, for what do we say a blessing? And last chapter, I think you were looking at blessings on specific foods and other things from which we benefit in the world. Chapter 9 actually continues with, on one level, blessings that we say for different moments or occasions or experiences, but are very different kinds of moments than eating a piece of fruit or eating a piece of bread. And we're going to take a look at that. So we can share the screen, or you can look at it on your own page if you have it. Oh, and the Hebrew looks great. Thank you. That's what you're referring to. Awesome. Right. So somebody want to read this first Mishnah for us, because I think it's always great to hear the full words of the Mishnah. You can do it in English. That's fine. Anybody?
Sure, I'll do it, Rabbi.
Thank you, Renee.
Okay. One who sees a place where miracles were done for Israel should say, "Blessed is God who did miracles for our ancestors in this place." If one sees a place that had idol worship uprooted from it, say, "Blessed is God who uprooted idol worship from our land."
Great. So the implication of all of this is, we know the brachot have formulas, right? So it always starts, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. And now they're saying that if you, in a place where miracles were done for Israel, we say, She'asa nisim lavotinu b'makom hazeh. Part of that should sound pretty familiar, right? We've heard a version of that before. And if we are in a place where idol worship was uprooted, we say, Baruch she'akar avodah zarah me'artzeinu, right? So I want to point out a couple of things that I think are really important here. And I want you to be asking yourself, because I'm going to ask you in a little while, what ties these things together? Because the Mishnah doesn't really tell us why it deals with these things in these categories, but I want to hear what you have to think in a few minutes. But I do want to point out in this first Mishnah that when it says that when you see a place, Shena'asu bo nisim le'Yisrael, right? The commentators are really clear that when we're talking about these miracles, this isn't when a miracle happens for me personally, but this is about the collective miracles that happen to Israel. And if you want a great example, the commentators all point to one, which is in the book of Exodus, when the sea is parted. And so that's an experience where everybody was part of the miracle, and we acknowledge that by saying like that these miracles happen for us. At the same time, right, when we see avodah zarah coming, being taken away, we also want to bless for that. Now, the important thing here is to recognize that it doesn't tell us what constitutes as avodah zarah, right? And I think that's really important, both because we need to keep learning more about what that is, but it also says that there's probably somewhere along the way, and I can tell you since the Mishnah was written 2,000 years ago, that there are other places along the way where what constitutes as avodah zarah is going to get translated and interpreted, right? Because if everything I assume is idol worship, or somebody else doesn't, right, then there's no collective experience here. But what I do want to ask you is, what do you make of this? Like, why are we blessing the miracles that happen to us collectively? What's that about? Anybody? Anyone? So I think that there's a way in which that this is not just about gratitude for what happens to us collectively, but yeah, Ariana, go ahead.
What ties us together as a community.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of what ties us together as a community, even when things are out of our decision-making ability for the community, right? Miracle happens, we'll see parts, and we are as one in that moment, right? And I think in some ways, by acknowledging that, we're acknowledging that it's through God that we are together, through God that the phenomena of nature might have been suspended, and through God that we ultimately find our identity as community, even if we don't yet know how to articulate what the godly part of it is, right? Like we often, I think most of us would say, we find the meaning, we find connections, we find miracles in the way human beings interact with each other and in what happens to us that's collective. And I think the Mishnah is telling us that it's not just about a human need being filled, but it's actually when something happens that's a collective experience for all of us, where the laws of nature are suspended, that we're in it together, and that that's a divine and godly thing. And likewise, I think that the Mishnah then tells us that we should also bless when avodah zarah is uprooted, because it's avodah zarah, the idol worship, that ultimately threatens not just us as a Jew. It's not about anti-Semitism per se, but it threatens our ability to be tied together and to understand the construct of God as creator and God as the determiner of what's happening in the natural world, if we start thinking about other gods being involved in that. Any other comments or questions about Mishnah 1? We're going to go kind of quickly, but I want to just give space if anybody has a question or comment. Nothing? Okay, then Mishnah 2. Somebody want to read that one for us?
I can do that, Rabbi.
Thank you.
On comets and on earthquakes and on lightning and on thunder and on storms say, blessed be God whose strength and might fill the world. On mountains and on hills and on seas and on rivers and on deserts say, blessed is God who makes the works of the beginning. Rav Yehuda says, one who sees the great seas says, blessed is God who made the great sea, only if she sees it occasionally. On rain and on good news say, blessed is God who is good and does good. And on bad news say, blessed are you, the true judge.
Great. So just to make sure we understand the categories here, right? We have on comets, on stars. This is not every time you see a star, like each night. This is probably, as the commentators understand it, like when there's a shooting star or a star that looks different. They describe it as having like a handle at the bottom, right? Like, so that's why I imagine, they don't use the term shooting star, but that's what I imagine it, because we talk about stars moving. And on earthquakes and lightning and thunder, we say, Baruch shekocho ugvurato malei olam, that the power of God fills the world, fills the earth. And on the mountains and the hills and the waters and even the deserts, we say, Oseh Maaseh Breshit, the one who makes the makings of creation. Now, what I want to ask you, if I could just for a moment, is what's the difference? Because those are all makings of creation. So what's the difference between the shooting star or the earthquake and lightning and thunder or storms versus the mountains and the hills and the deserts and the rivers?
Some things are permanent, whereas other things are fleeting.
Okay, so you're saying the first ones, the comets and the earthquakes, those are fleeting? Is that who said that? I didn't see who was talking. Mimi. Okay. Could be one thing, whereas the mountains and deserts and all that continues. Okay. Anybody have a different idea?
I think the earthquakes and lightning and thunder and storms can be destructive.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's it's not just that there's destruction, and that there's that's a way in which, like, you know, even the sound of thunder is so overwhelming that, like, the sound throws us off because it's like you think something's happening that's really dangerous, right? Or that changes, right? And so these first category of natural phenomena are things where, like, really the strength of that experience is so profound in the moment. You know, we just had, some of you may know that out here in LA about a week and a half or 2 weeks ago, we had an earthquake. And I don't know exactly how it happened because it was 4:30 in the morning, but I know that my eyes were open just at the moment before the rolling started, which probably means there was some rolling, then my eyes open, and then more rolling, but I don't really know because I don't know what exactly woke me up. And both the feeling and the sound in that moment were so strong, and it really is the strength of nature, or the strength of God's nature, that, you know, that can be experienced. I think we could also think of that when we hear about lightning or other storms, versus when we look at a mountain and a hill or the seas. We know it exists, but there's not, and it's like part of the tapestry of what we see as God's creation, and I like to call it as God's, you know, painting, you know, what do you call it, the pad on which he's painting, right, on God, which God's painting, right? But there's a difference between these two categories, right? So then we go on, and Rabbi Yehuda says that if you see a great ocean, the great sea, which some people think means only one sea, some think means any big ocean, then you're supposed to say, Haro'et hayam hagadol, who sees, Baruch she'asa et hayam hagadol, that God made the sea. Now, you know, there are times, again, I happen to live in a place where there is so much nature within a few miles that I think about these blessings a lot. And there have been times in my life when I've been able to go to the ocean regularly, and it becomes so like normal and regular that you don't think about it, right? Debbie, I know you have this experience too, because you spend a lot of time. I'm sure there are other people who do as well. And yet, when you haven't been for a while, and you go to a beach, or even to a place where you can see the ocean, you realize the vastness of the world. Like it feels like it goes on forever, and the experience of what is finite versus infinite get a little bit mixed up. And here I think that Rabbi Yehuda is telling us that when we see the ocean, we're reminded that infinite and finite that are coming together in that moment is an act from God. The creation of the ocean is an act from God that gives us that experience. And likewise, then we go on and we say, on rain and on good news, we say, Baruch HaTov VaMeitiv, right? Why would we say the same blessing for rain as for when things that happen in our life that are good? Debbie, I think you're talking, but you're on mute. I see your head shaking. You're still on mute.
I'm trying.
There you go.
Okay. We pray for rain. It makes everything work and it makes everything grow. So rain is good.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a way in which at this moment we're talking about, like the rain. If we're thinking of a world as being based on the land, the rain does bring besorot tovot. The rain does bring good things, because without the rain, we don't have the grain, and we don't then have the ability to have food, right? So there is a way in which these two are connected. And then, since we're talking about the good, now we're going to raise the bad, right? Because we're not a people who just blesses the good. We're also a people who say there is blessing in the challenging, right? And that's just, think of it, for example, when someone dies, right? We say, Baruch Dayan HaEmet, blessed is the God who adjudicates truth, right? That's a hard one, I think, for us, because most of us think that blessing is good things. Blessing are the gifts. Now, we can talk about silver linings, and most of us have spent the last 5 months having to find silver linings in the challenges of our world, right? But here, I think this isn't about blessings are always good, right? Blessings are acts of God about perceptions about where creative forces come from. And those creative forces have the possibility for good, and sometimes there's the possibility for destruction and challenge. But I want to just go back, because if you notice in these first couple Mishnayot, we talk about seeing things. And some of these things are not things we can see with our eyes. Some of them are about experiences or perceptions, hearing, right? So our senses are being drawn into this. And I think we're redefining how the senses work, right? One of my favorite places in the Torah is in the verses just prior to the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. It says, "V'kol ha'am ro'im et hakolot," like the entire people saw the thunder. That should spark a question, right? How do you see thunder, right? And the commentators say that, that moment was so distinctly spiritual and different that people could see things that they normally couldn't see and hear things that they normally couldn't hear, and that the senses were a little bit confused. And I think that what the Mishnah is inviting us into is to really asking, what does seeing mean? Seeing doesn't always mean a physical thing. Seeing can mean experiencing, right? Seeing can mean an unmediated experience of recognition. My eyes know something, even though I didn't see it. That kind of a thing. Questions or comments so far? Carol? Is that a hand? No? Okay. So the Mishnah then goes on in Mishnah 3 to say, somebody want to read that one for us?
I can read it, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Okay. When one builds a new house and acquires new vessels, she says, "Blessed is God that kept us alive and sustained us and brought us to this time. Bless upon the bad which contains good, and upon the good which contains bad. She who prays over what has already happened, this prayer is in vain. How? If his wife or she herself or her partner was pregnant and she said, may it be your will that my wife, me, my partner, give birth to a specific gender child, this prayer is in vain. If she was coming on the way and heard the sound of screaming in the city, and she said, may it be your will that these are not the children of my house, this is a prayer in vain.
Great. I love this Mishnah, right? Because it starts with continuing the same idea of experiencing things anew, right? So when we build a new home or we acquire new vessels, or we know whenever we experience something new, the prayer that we say is Shechianu v'kimanu v'higianu lezman hazeh, right? Like that is that we are as if we are new. We're revived. We're given a new life when something new comes into our midst. But then immediately the Mishnah goes in and starts taking us a little bit different direction, right? Because sometimes within something good, there are things that are challenging. Or within something bad, there are things that are beautiful. And the Mishnah says that those are also things that we should bless. But notice what's different about this category. What's missing? At the moment, there's no formula for what we say here. The formula of Shechianu, but for this category of the good within the bad or the bad within the good, it says there should be a blessing, and maybe the implication is that it should be Shechianu, but it doesn't necessarily tell us in the Mishnah. We would only know if we go to the Talmud, the Gemara, and then to Maimonides and the Shulchan Aruch, what this really means. But also, there's a caution here, which I think is a really amazing forethought of the rabbis, right? Because it says that if you take something that's already been determined and you try to bless it to have a different outcome, then that's like a blessing in vain, right? Now, vain, we take vain, I think what they mean by vain is different than what we mean by vain. It doesn't mean it's, it means it's like empty, it's devoid of recognition of God's role. Some people would say it's taking God's name in vain, right? Because take the example it gives, right? If a woman has already given birth to a baby, and that's the gender and sex both of the baby have been determined, or maybe not, right? Then for me to say, oh God, I hope she had a girl, or I hope she had a boy, not only is like there's no way for that prayer blessing to be answered, but it also sets up a case where through the natural processes, through God's work, I'm only going to be disappointed. So I'm going to be separated from God as well as from whatever the experience is. So we could all probably, if we had more time, I'd ask you to think about like, what are those moments when you know what the outcome already is and you're still like praying that it was different than it was, right? And that's not always possible. This, by the way, reminds me of one other thing that I want to say before we go to the next Mishnah. You know, when you talk to people who are specialists in helping people cope with illness and death, and they talk about talking to kids about it, they always say, like, you have to be honest. Like, you know, if you say, mommy went away, well, they're going to say, well, where did she go? Right? When is she coming back? And we often do that because we're afraid of confronting like that, you know, mommy died, right? And so being able to live in the experience of what is happening in the moment and being honest about it, that's, I think, in a way what this part of the Mishnah is inviting us to do. Don't keep hoping for something to look different that can't look different. And you still need to be able to recognize that in that, as the next Mishnah will show, like there, you know, it may not have been what you thought you wanted, but it's going to be something good, which was from the third Mishnah. Now here, when we get to this, now that we talked about that experience of blessing, what we thought we wanted and what is, now the Mishnah tells us, when you enter a large city, you should pray twice, once on your entrance and once on your exit. And Ben Azai says you should pray 4 times, twice on the entrance and twice on the exit. And you should give thanks for what is past and supplicate for the future. So imagine this scenario, because this is actually quite amazing, right? Because it's saying that when I go into a city, if I know I'm going into a city, I'm going to pray before I go to that city, go to that place. Maybe the place, I'll find the place, that I'll get there safely, that I'll find what I'm looking for, that I'm going to see family, friends, whatever it might be, right? But also once I've gotten there, I have something to bless for as well, because I actually got there, right? And that those are distinct experiences, right? And I think that's why it's saying one is to give thanks for the past, and the other is supplicate or request, cry out for the future. And both of those are occasions for blessing. Questions, comments?
Rabbi, I have a question about the previous Mishnah.
Yeah.
So let's hypothetically say that a woman is pregnant. So you cannot say, I wish for a boy, I wish for a girl. But is it in vain to say, I hope that the mother and the child will be healthy? Is that also presupposed?
I don't think so. Because we know, I mean, scientifically, we know that that different illnesses can happen at different moments, right? And it's not necessary, it's not saying that everything is predetermined, but it's saying after the point at which something is determined, to bless for that to not be it, or for it to be different, that's the vanity.
Right.
Right? So, you know, so the development of the fetus comes in different ways at different moments, and based on the mother's health and the baby's health, different things can happen at different moments of the pregnancy. We know that the gender is already, or the sex, I should say, not the gender, but the sex is already determined.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
So that's what it also forces us to understand, not just in this example, but any example, it forces us to understand science a little bit better, right? So at the risk of, you know, taking a little bit of a chance, right? Like, so right now, to say, you know, if somebody has already tested positive for the virus, and then to say, oh, I hope they test negative, and maybe that was a false positive, and I'm going to say a blessing on that. That would be the equivalent, right? Because right now there's not, although there can be false positives, right? There's no reason to believe that person isn't positive in this very moment. You can hope for their healing. That's a different blessing, right? But to hope that the positive turns out to be a false positive, that's more complicated, right?
Thank you.
Okay, go back to Mishnah 5, because what I love about this Mishnah, you can go straight to the English. I'm just going to summarize this because we're getting close to our time. What I love about this particular Mishnah is that it takes us back to that idea of blessing on the bad, just as you would bless on the good, and it ties it to the Shema, which, if you remember, was where like we, you know, the beginning of our Mishnah, at the beginning of the Masechet, was about the prayer and the times of prayer, and recitation of prayer. And so I love that the Mishnah closes with this idea, and that it gives us an interpretation of the different verses of the Shema, right? The Hafta, that to pray, like to talk about blessing God with our heart and our soul and all that we have, right? Can you go to the Hebrew for 1 second? Right, so look at right, that's what we're talking about. And that part of that is now what they're saying is that the way we bless God for the good and the bad is a manifestation of recognizing that that is part of serving God with all that we have, whatever that looks like, whatever that means. We can go back to the English now, right? And that is an important part of this experience. But the Mishnah doesn't stop there, because it goes on and it talks about what other blessings we say when we don't take light of one's head with the eastern gate, and how blessings were ended, and ultimately it brings us back to this idea that blessings are a part of how we do for God, and how Torah and action by God come together. And so when we acknowledge something, any moment, through a blessing, we're not just elevating that experience in that moment, but we're ultimately acknowledging that God plays a role in the creative forces, and we're acknowledging that our blessing is in some way our offering to God. And I would add our offering to ourselves, because when we're able to acknowledge that experience as something beyond us and beyond our control, then the experience of it is that much richer. I want to just say one last thing, and then I have a question for you before we switch to the Siyyum. And that's that for me, I think that blessing, and frankly prayer too, are really invitations to accept that we're not in control of almost anything. I know that sounds really scary to us, because we're used to living our lives like we're in control of everything. But if you need a reminder, just look at the last 5 months of our lives, or 6 months almost now, right? Like, we run through our lives as if we're really in control of everything. But when you think about it, we're not as in control of any given moment. And when we can acknowledge that and bless it and sanctify it, I think we're inviting ourselves to just be a little bit more okay with the idea of not being in control, and to being able to accept a word that Jews don't usually like very much, which is surrender. Right? When I can surrender to my not being in control, I can find ways to accept and integrate whatever I might be experiencing. So what I want to ask you, if you can think back, or maybe I'll pose the question now, because in a few minutes we're going to look at the Hadran Alakh for every chapter. And what I want you to think about is, what is it that there's that we've forgotten to, like, what did the rabbis not give us a blessing for? What's a moment where there should be a blessing that there's not, or that you wish there was, or that you've created one or would create one if you were writing the blessings? That's part of what it means to say Hadran Alakh, right? When we do it, when we summarize our learning and end our learning with a siyyum, it's not really an ending or a completion. It's a summarizing. And we're summarizing it because we say, I'm going to return to it. And when I return to it and return to it and return to it, I then have an opportunity for a new insight or for a new application, or even to ask new questions like, what blessing would I add in today's world that wasn't part of what was? And that's where we're going to make our transition to our siyyum, because when we do a siyyum, it's an opportunity to celebrate what we've done. It's an opportunity to turn back to what we've done, and an opportunity to bless the moment that we recognize that we've gotten to this place and how we can return to it. And so I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Aviva Funke, who wrote a beautiful song about Hadran Alakh and returning to our learning, that I invited her to come and share with us as part of our siyyum. Hi.
Wow, so good to learn again with you, Rabbi Peretz, always.
Yeah,
thank you for
you.
including me in this holy group of amazing women. I can just see on the screen the Torah that's just pouring into people's hearts. And I love this question of what blessing was forgotten. And I want to offer this song. I did send the words in. I don't know if we'll be able to share the screen. Fantastic. So you can keep yourselves muted and sing along with me at home. Right, when we're saying Hadran Alakh, we're going to return to this learning. We're going to return to the text that we have spilled over and really meditated on and contemplated, and we pray that they sink in deeper and deeper every single time to make us better, more loving, wiser people, more connected to our Torah and more connected to each other. So here we go. Take a nice breath and think about where you were when this whole learning journey began. Think about all the teachers that have brought the wisdom down into you and have awoken the questions and the thoughts in you. And today we conclude a journey of learning, but we don't end it. We're preparing to go into the next level of our learning together. Today we mark a moment when our learning seems complete. We've parsed it out and talked about what all these texts can mean. But anyone who comes to learn will hear it from the sages. The first time through can only be what's written on the pages. Hadran Alakh, to you we will return. Hadran Alakh, to all that we have learned. Underneath what's written is a hidden magic world of wisdom, like a lotus flower yearning to unfurl. A secret life of layers are buried in these books. The only way we'll find them is to take another look. Hadran Alakh, to you we will return. Oh, Hadran Alakh, to all that we have learned. Let's learn it again and again and again. Turn it again and again and again. Let's learn it again and again and again. Turn it again and again and again. It would take a lifetime or the next 2, 3, or 4 to answer all the questions. That's what we're learning for. And even though this moment marks the time we feel complete, please know these texts are saying, please come back to me. Join me. Hadran Alakh, to you we will return. that we have learned. Let's learn it again and again and again. Learn it again and again and again. Let's learn it again and again and again. Learn it again and again and again. Let's learn it again and again and again. Learn it again and again and again. Learn it again and again and again. Turn it again and again and again. Mazel tov.
Eshkoach. Thank you, Rabbi Aviva Funke. What she was too modest to tell you all that I thought she would, which is why I didn't, is Aviva wrote that song for her own ordination two years ago, I think it was, right? 2 years ago, and played it at the ordination, and it just spoke so beautifully of what it means to come to a summation of any kind of learning that as soon as I was asked to do this evening, and it was going to be online and not in person at the convention, I said, all right, I got to call Rabbi Funke and see if she would do that song. So hold on to that spirit of turning it again and turning it again, because Rabbi Wollensfields is now going to share the Hadran Alakh for all the different chapters that you've learned. And at the very end, after we finish the ritual part of a Siyyum, we're going to come back out to that song to sing the refrain and the chorus together to close our program.
Thank you. Oh my God. I'm verklempt, I have to say. I just got a tissue because I have a feeling I'm going to start crying, which is wonderful. What incredible learning with Rabbi Peretz, Toda Rabba, and Yasher Kochech, and to Rabbi Funke. I have not met you in person yet, but one day I hope to. I find my way to Arizona sometimes. My mom has a place there. Don't know what's going to happen next year, but hopefully all of our paths will cross, and I'm so glad that you could join us today. So it's really ironic because we did Rabbi Labovitz, who I've known for a really long time. I knew her as we were Gail and Ellen back then, almost 30 years ago at JTS. We used to sit together in the Women's League Seminary Synagogue. That I knew it was going to be the Siyyum for Shabbat today, for those who did Daf Yomi, the studying of a page of Talmud every day, and that the Siyyum was going to be today. I said, okay, we could do a double, but I didn't realize when Rabbi Peretz was talking how everything has to do with the Parsha this week too. With Parshat Re'eh is about blessings and curses and how we perceive them. And it's just, it all totally came together, how we can view our blessings and our curses differently with all the different perspectives. And then clearly something that was completely out of our hands, but is very well meaningful to note, is the passing of just a few days ago. We're in the Shiva period of Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz of blessed memory, who many of us probably would have never been able to study Mishnah or Gemara or Talmud or without Rabbi Steinsaltz for his translations. And when I was finishing up my study of Shabbat this past Shabbat, I actually used one of my editions from him. I mean, Steinsaltz, I feel badly all these years that I never called him Rabbi Steinsaltz, because Steinsaltz, basically you were in Talmud class and you said, let's see what Steinsaltz says. And not because it was Rabbi Steinsaltz, it was his edition. It's like, let's go see what the dictionary says. He's the dictionary. He's the reason why so many of us can now study Talmud. So I'm going to let those of people who have finished studying the second tractate of Talmud today, of Shabbat, to unmute themselves, because we should hear your names and applaud yourself, and don't be modest. So I'll start. I finished the Shabbat today, but we all finished Mishnah Brachot, but it's a double simcha today. So Barbara.
I finished today. Shabbat.
Marilyn, did you finish?
I actually finished it yesterday because the section was there. I never thought I'd be able to do this. I missed Brachot. I started too late, but then I thought, this is a good time to start to do.
Anytime's a good time. Who else? I know at least two more.
I finished Shabbat, the second book of Shabbat this morning.
Mazel tov. Don't be modest here. This is not our time to be modest.
I have the last one keyed up to do after we finish this for Shabbat.
Excellent. It's so wonderful and amazing to be able to see so many of us study Mishnah together, study Talmud together. And Gail Labovitz is with us. And if she wants to, I can tell you that her husband, Bill, who I've known forever too, she's driving apparently. But what we did, now we have a retrospective, as Rabbi Peretz had told us, that Hadran Alakh is what we will go back to, what we will study again. And not all of our teachers could join us this evening for many different reasons, especially since everybody's in a different time zone, in a different part of the world. So we have our quotes from them of what they want to encourage us. I had a feeling that Gail finished brachot, and thanks for the shout out. Thank you, Rabbi Labovitz.
Mute me.
Oh, you're
Hi,
on
it's
here.
Gail. Hi. Yeah, no, Bill's got me. He's holding up the phone for me while I drive. Yes, I finished Shabbat today in the car. It's a little while ago. And you have what I wrote about Brachot chapter 1, so I'll just let you read that. But it's wonderful to be here, and Mazal Tov to everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi Labovitz. So what Rabbi Labovitz wrote was one thing that I see in the opening of Brachot that has been really on my mind since the onset of the COVID-19 crisis and stay-at-home orders is the value of having structure in our days and in our lives. Having the chance to teach a class twice a week for the past 2 months, for example, helped give me the structure to resume and complete our work that was needed to get done, that I knew needed to get done. Knowing I will say Shema every morning and every evening, that there are set blessings that accompany them, and that there are set hours of the day at which they must be said, has been a part of my life for a long time. But now I appreciate more than ever what that consistency can provide for all of us emotionally and spiritually at a time when we so desperately need it. Toda Rabah, thank you very much, and truly Eitzah Tova. So Rabbi Peretz, it's also a way of us to review who has taught over these months. So Rabbi Peretz taught us 2 chapters. Chapter 2, would you like to read your own quote since you're with us?
Kavanah, directing one's intention, is a key component of Jewish prayer, and especially of the recitation of the Shema. Directing one's intention doesn't always mean having some sort of epiphanal moment of existential meaning. It can translate into saying the words and pronouncing them. It can mean understanding their meaning, or it can mean gaining some new experience, insight, or meaning. For that reason, the rabbis have always asked us for full concentration in saying the Shema, and there has always been the recognition that sometimes the distractions around us make that difficult.
Thank you. Chapter 3, we had Rabbi Pamela Barbash teach us. I find it spiritually fulfilling to repeatedly study the mitzvah of reciting the Shema because we're urged to love God, a way of relating to God that brings God into the daily routines of my life. And then for chapter 4, I taught you. So I suggest that we all return to Brachot, specifically chapter 4, Mishnah 2, where Rabbi Nachanya ben Hanina is said to have recited a short prayer when he entered and exited the house of study. Let us all take this practice to heart and create our own creative prayer before and after our prayer services, especially our virtual services. How can we develop our own personal practice to not be mechanical? And then we went to chapter 5 with Rabbi Chaya Rowan Baker from Kehilat Ramat Zion in French Hill, Jerusalem, who told me that she loved the invitation to join us tonight, but she'll be sleeping. Thank you for the privilege of learning with you from so far away. Back when we were Zoom novices, our Zoom connection was lost for a large part of my session, so there's much to return to. I look forward to learning again about the power of the Shlichat Tzibur and the significance of their kavanah, so the person who's leading the service and their intention. How it might be life-changing, what an enormous responsibility it is, and how humbling it is to realize we cannot always control it, much as we would want. And then we continued. Rabbi Barmash came back to teach us again for chapter 6. I study the brachot, blessings for food, because it makes me more aware of the importance of gratitude and how amazing it is that when I plant a seed for a radish or a tomato or another plant, that seed amazingly grows into that plant and not another. And then we continued our journey with Rabbi Gisa Edinburgh for chapter 7. If you remember, this was the Sunday before Yom HaShoah, and she was teaching us from Berlin. It was wonderful studying with you, connecting from far away, and to feel the shared community. From our joint studying, I take the question about being inclusive or exclusive. Who is welcome at our table or tables, and who does count for what? Exploring further halakhic, religious law, and sociological answers. And then we continued on to Israel with Rabbi Amy Levin, who also taught 2 of our introduction classes, even before we started chapter 1. Rabbi Levin wrote Hadran Alakh, chapter 8 of Mishnah Brachot. In our chapter, which focused on disputes between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai on matters concerning a meal, what gets blessed first or second? It seems that each house was determined to say the opposite of the other. Really, they couldn't agree on one single point. I'd like to go back to our chapter and dive deeper into those disputes. Were those scholars promoting mutually exclusive views of the halakha? Or were they engaged in an elegant, covert conceit to push learners to view each question from every possible angle? And although we just learned it, Rabbi Peretz, we still have what to go back to.
I'm going to actually let people read that on their own, because I want to just ask the questions. So, because I want the Hadran Alakh to include what you would add. So I asked you a question at the beginning, like, what would you, for today's Hadran, right? What's the blessing that you would or do or want to or wish our tradition offered, or that you do offer? Like, what's a moment of blessing that we haven't heard about? What?
And you can unmute yourself and hopefully share with us. Oh, wait, there's something in the chat.
Loving my children. Yeah.
How about our connection with people outside of Judaism and the value of community in that way?
Yeah. Or even, I mean, so many levels of that, the profound interaction of a moment when there's religious tolerance or religious understanding, right? Rabbi Funke wrote, loving my children, and I was just imagining in a world when we're not stuck at home, whether we're aunts or grandparents or mothers, especially like when you're not with your kids and then coming back and that moment of pure joy at the end of a day of seeing their face, until they become teenagers, of course, but just really what it means to like see them anew and them to see you anew is a moment for a blessing. Yeah. Anyone else?
I'll chime in another one if I can, because we have this opportunity. A blessing for a really good night's sleep. I mean, I think that just the fact that we can sleep mostly through the night or a long stint of the night deserves its own bracha. Sleep is a powerful medicine. I wish I had more of it.
Sure. That might be the good within the bad, or the bad within the good, right? That they're talking about.
I think that when we can hug each other again,
and
really kiss and embrace, that I think we'll all need a ritual and a blessing for that as well.
Sure. Barbara, were you going to say something? I thought you would.
I was. Rabbi just said it. The ability to touch people, because I'm visiting my grandchildren right now and not really able to hug and touch.
Right.
Wearing a mask when you're together there's a division there. So we're going to need some kind of a blessing when we can actually touch each other again.
Yeah, so that's the Hadran I want to add to what I wrote on here, just to really be able to ask ourselves, like, what would the blessing be? Part of the Siyyum is a pledge to come back to Torah study, to come back to this Torah study, to experience the sweetness of Torah. And the rabbis devised this formula that we say in doing so. Rabbi Wollensfields is sharing, you can go to the first one, that the Eliezer, that this is a beautiful adaptation from Rabbi Eliezer Diamond, who's a professor at the Jewish Theological Seminary, which he made egalitarian. And it talks about, like I said, the pledge to return. You'll hear Masechet Brachot a couple of times, which is the tractate that we just learned, and a gratitude to God for allowing us to get to this place of study. And then the line of tradition that you'll notice has some interesting names added to it. So is this the part that you have?
Yes, I'm going to do it. You'll see. So we have two versions of it, and I want everyone to be able to see the English as I say the Hebrew. So as Rabbi Peretz said, that it's a pledge to continue our study. And because we say pledges 3 times, so for example, we repeat Kol Nidre 3 times, this too, the first 2 paragraphs we say 3 times. So the first paragraph I'm going to read in English and Hebrew, then English, then Hebrew. And then for the second one, for the second paragraph here, the Yehi Ratzon, the first reading is going to be Rabbi Eliezer Diamond's egalitarian version. Then I'm going to have Ellen Bresnick's going to read it in Hebrew, the Rav Papa ones. And then Barbara Ezring is going to read this paragraph in English. So we all know it, and this way we'll hear a little differently for each one. So we begin. And those who are doing their Shabbat, they can say that as well. And I can send it to you, or you can find it on the Rabbinical Assembly website. Hadran Alakh Masechet Mishnah Brachot, Hadrach Alan Datan Alakh Masechet Mishnah Brachot, V'datach Alan La Nitneshe Minach Masechet Mishnah Brachot, V'la Nitneshi Minan La Be'alma Hadain, V'la Be'alma De'ate. We will return to you, Masechet Mishnah Brachot, and you will return to us. Our thoughts are about your Masechet Mishnah Brachot, and your thoughts are about us. We will not forget you, Masechet Mishnah Brachot, and you will not forget us, not in this world and not in the world to come. Hadran Alakh Masechet Mishnah Brachot, V'hadran Drach Alan Datan Alakh Masechet Mishnah Brachot, V'datach Alan La Nitneshe Minach Masechet Mishnah Brachot, V'la Titneshi Minan La Be'alma Hadain, V'la Be'alma Da'ate. You'll notice it doesn't sound like total Hebrew because it was written, much of it, in Aramaic. So I will try to translate parts of what Rabbi Eliezer Diamond wrote. Yehi ratzon milfanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu shetehei toratcha umanutenu ba'olam hazeh u'tehei imanu la'olam haba. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe ben Maimon, Maimonides, Moshe ben Mendel, Yehudit Hagibora, Yehudit Hamora, that's Judith Houtman, Avraham Avinu, Avraham ben David, Avraham Yehoshua ben Moshe Mordechai Verezel, Abraham Joshua Heschel, Esther Hamalka, He Hadassah, Hadassah HaChachma HaManhiga, Zachariah HaNavi, Zachariah HaRofeh, Zachariah HaChacham VaHamaskil, Rachel Imenu, Rachel HaMishoreret, so Rachel the author, Shlomo HaMelech, Shlomo ben Avraham, Shlomo Zalman ben Yitzchak HaKohen V'chaya Rachel, I believe that's Solomon Schechter, Sarah Imenu, Sarah Babitzalel Verezel, I believe that's our Matilda Schechter. And now, Ellen, you will read the second paragraph here, the Yehi Ratzon, please.
Okay. Yehi Ratzon milfanecha, Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu, shetehei toratcha u'mnuchatenu ba'olam hazeh, u'tehei imanu le'olam haba. Chanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achai bar Papa, Abba Mari bar Papa, Rafram bar Papa, Rachish bar Papa, Sorchav bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Daru bar Papa.
Barbara, in the English, please, the second paragraph. Oh, you're not unmuted. Got it.
Sorry. May it be your will, God, our God and God of our ancestors, that your Torah be our occupation in this world and will remain with us in the world to come. Hanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Adai bar Papa, Abba Mari bar Papa, Rafram bar Papa, Rachish bar Papa, Surhav bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Daru bar Papa.
May the words of Torah, Lord our God, be sweet in our mouths and the mouths of all your people, so that our children and all the children of the house of Israel may come to love you and want to study your Torah on its own merit. Through your commandments, we are wiser than our enemies, for they are ever with me. May my heart be filled with your laws in order that we not despair. May we never forget your laws, for by them we are kept alive. Blessed are you, God, who teaches us your laws. Amen, amen, Selah forever. There's one more.
Oh, okay. I thought we were
Odim anachnu lefanecha Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu v'imatenu shesamta chalkenu miyoshvei beit hamidrash ve'lo samta chalkenu miyoshvei kranot she'anu mashkimim ve'hem mashkimim anu mashkimim l'divrei Torah ve'hem mashkimim l'dvarim b'telim. I could have skipped this. Anu amelim ve'hem amelim. Anu amelim u'mekablim tzachar ve'hem amelim ve'enam mekablim tzachar. Anu ratzim ve'hem ratzim. Anu ratzim l'chayei ha'olam haba ve'hem ratzim liv'er shichet. Shene'emar v'ata Eloheinu Elohim toridim liv'er shachat anshe damim u'mirma lo yechetzu yimehem va'ani iftach bach. May it be your will, God, my God, that as you have helped me finish, we have finished. Masechet Mishnah Brachot. And in hope, and in your places, you'll be reading this as well. Thus will you help us begin other Masechtot, tractates, and books and finish them. To learn and to teach, to protect and fulfill all the words of your Torah with love. May the merit of all the Tanaim and Amoraim and scholars stand with us and for our prodigy, so that the Torah does not leave our mouth and the mouths of our descendants forever. And may it be filled through us. When you walk, it will guide you. When you lie down, it will protect you. And when you wake, it will converse with you. For in me, Torah, your days will increase and years of life will be added for you. Length of days is in her right hand, and in her left, wealth and honor. God will give strength. God will bless God's nation with peace. Adonai oz la'amo yitain. Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom.
So we have one last part of the ritual, and that's to say Kaddish. It's a little bit different, and there's just a few different words. Rabbi Willens Fields is going to lead us, but I want to just say a little known fact that this Kaddish, which is called Kaddish de'itchadata, is actually the Kaddish that traditionally would have been said also at a burial. Today, many of us use just the mourner's Kaddish, which is certainly fine. But this Kaddish de'itchadata, which is a Kaddish that talks about making oneness, that's literally what it means. I love the connection of the fact that when we study a book and when we say goodbye to someone whose life's book is closing, that it has the same Kaddish. Right? And that there is a way in which that we are uncovering the life of someone who wrote like Rabbi Yehuda, who was the editor of the Yehuda Hanasi. We are uncovering his life and his mind and his contributions to the world and all the rabbis that he represents by studying Mishnah. Just like when we say goodbye to someone, we are acknowledging that the book of their life in this world has closed. And it's for us to then open and reopen and turn it again and turn it again, as Rabbi Aviva's song taught us. So for those that are able, we're going to rise. Rabbi is going to lead us in this Kaddish, and then we're going to close with the chorus of the song to turn it again and again at the end.
And many of the words will sound familiar because the first paragraph is different, but the rest of it is the Kaddish D'Rabbanan. So if you want to stumble through the words of the first paragraph, it's a tongue twister. And the rest of it, I hope you will join us. And I want to just see one thing. The next page, I do have the Kaddish D'Rabbanan on it, but we're going to stay on this page. Yitzkadal v'yitzkadash shemei Rabbah Bialma dehu atid le'itzchadata ula achaya meitaya ula asaka lechaye alma uliv mivnei karta di Yerushalayim ula shachlel hechle begava ule mekar pulchana nuchra'a me'ar'a bela'a tava pulchana dishmaya la'atre b'yamlich kudsha berichu b'malchutei mikare b'chayechon u'v'yamechon v'chaye d'chol beit Yisrael ba'agala u'bizman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehi Shemei Rabbah Mevarach Leolam Olmei Olmai. Yeah, you can unmute yourself if you want to join. Yitzbarach v'yishtabach v'yitzpa'ar v'yitzromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal Shemei D'Kedusha B'richu Le'ela Minkol Birchata V'shirata Tushbechata V'nechemata Da'amiran V'alma V'imru. Amen. Al Yisrael, V'al Rabbanan, V'al Talmidei Hon, V'al Kol Talmidei Hon, V'al Kol Man Da'askin V'araita, Di V'yatra Hadain, V'chol Atar V'yatar, Yehi L'chon Shlama Rabbah, China V'chista V'rachamin, Chayin Arifin, Mizona Rebifei, Ufarkana in Kadam Vahon Dishmaya Va'ara V'imru. Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba in Shemaya V'chaim Tovim Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru. Amen. Oseh Shalom V'imromav Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'al Kol Yoshvei Tevel V'imru. Amen.
Rabbi Aviva.
All right. Mazel tov to all of you.
Ready?
Let's learn it again and again and again. Turn it again and again and again. Let's learn it again and again and again. Turn it again and again and again. Let's learn it again and again and again. Turn it again and again and again. Let's learn it again and again and again. Turn it again and again and again. Hadran Alakh, to you we will return. Hadran Alakh, to all that we have learned. Okay, you know it now. Let's do it. Let's learn it again and again and again. Turn it again and again and again. Let's learn it again and again and again. Turn it again and again and again. Hadran Alakh, to all that we have learned. Blessings to all of you on your continued learning journey. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Aviva, and thank you for giving our time. This is Aviva's first week in a new job, so thank you for giving us.
Thank you.
My
That part I didn't know. Mazel tov. So you could say Shechianu with all of us for you.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, and Yasha Koach to everybody. Thank you all who made this possible, to Ellen and Barbara thank you, Yasha Kochachem, and I know that the committee will continue doing amazing work under Ellen and Julia's guidance. And for all of us, let us continue our learning.
Amen.
Amen. And thank you, Rabbi Peretz.